the two tablets of testimony, something along those lines. Luchot even kituvim etzba Elohim, hewn of stone, written with the finger of God. So Moshe has just now finished receiving the tablets and some revelatory material from Sinai, written with God's very finger. And it's at that moment that the narrative takes us to what's called chapter 32, verse 1. Within just the very next pasuk, Vayar ha'am, and the people saw Kiboshesh Moshe Laredet min ha'har. We'll come back to this term Kibosh, this term Boshesh, but let's call it for now Moses. The people saw that Moshe has tarried, Moshe is delayed coming down the mountain. Vayikahel ha'am ala Haron, the people congregate against, or gather against Aaron. They say to him, Vayomer elav kum, get up. Aseh lanu Elohim, make for us an Elohim. Make for us, here I'll translate, a God, Elohim. Asher yelchu lefanenu, who shall go before us. Kizeh Moshe ha'ish, asher ha'alanu me'eretz Mitzrayim. Because this man, Moses, who took us out of the land of Egypt, lo yadanu mehayalo. We don't know what happened to him. Vayomer alehem Aharon, Aaron says to them, Parakundas mehazahav asher ba'aznei nishtechem v'nechem v'notechem. Remove, take off the golden rings, which are on the ears, rings or earrings or jewelry, on the ears of your wives and children, and bring it to me. And they did so. They took off his golden jewelry and they bring it to Aaron. And what does Aaron do? This is the beginning of the story of what becomes the calf. He takes this jewelry from their hands and I'll read it as he sort of he fashions it and fashions it in a mold, perhaps different readings, different translations. And makes it into perhaps a molten calf. Vayomeru El Elohecha Yisrael asher helucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. And they said, these are your gods, Israel, who took you out of Egypt. Vayara Aharon, Aaron saw, built up an altar in front of it, probably the Egel, Vayiven Mizbech Lepanav, and Vayikra Aharon Vayomar Chag L'Adonai Machar. And he said, tomorrow is a holiday to God. Vayashkimu Mimacharat, they got up early the next morning. Vayalu Olot Vayigushu Shlamamim, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Vayeshev Ha'am Le'achol V'Shato, and the people sat down to eat and drink. Vayakumu V'Tzachek, and they got up V'Tzachek to in frivolity. We'll have to come back to that term. And the next thing we hear is, and we're going to circle back in a moment by the Be'er Moshe. The next thing we hear is God says to Moshe, go and descend, Lechared, go down from this mountain, because the people which you have taken out of Egypt, Asher ha'alitem Mitzrayim, Shichei Samcha, your people have become corrupted. Okay, and the story goes on. Okay, so maybe I'll even pause before we circle back in case anyone who's here with us want to chime in, you can unmute. And if you can't do that, you can write in the chat. Any questions that come to mind through that quick overview of the psukim. So we have Anne and Yael here, and Evie feel free as well, and everyone else who's here. Any questions that come to mind? Anything you're wondering about as we read those verses?
If not, I definitely have a lot of thoughts and questions, but also if anyone else does, feel free to chime in at any point. It's so interesting because this is coming right off of Har Sinai. I mean, there's a break in the text from Har Sinai to now, but right, we're framing it. This is when Moshe Rabbeinu is getting the Luchot, and Kivoshesh Moshe is maybe taking longer, is harried, and Bnei Israel's first response, they're clearly so panic stricken. Like, we need to figure things out. And they're going to problem solving mode. And it's just so interesting, after seeing God directly and all these miracles, that this is their first response. That's
Yeah,
a
maybe we could take that as a point of departure. By the way, I can't see the chat as I'm screen sharing if someone
someone. Reba
yeah,
said Moshe is not who took them out of Egypt. Hashem did, right? That's also interesting. It's framing that, well, Moshe Rabbeinu is
right.
the,
Let's make
the
that.
actual leader.
Yeah, so we can frame that into a question, right? So why are they saying that it's Moshe who took them out of Egypt if we understand it to be think about the Ten Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Tzivticha Meretz Mitzrayim. That's what they heard. I am God who took you out of Egypt. So what do they mean by this notion of Moshe? Where's this Moshe who took us out of Egypt? Okay, so that's an important question. Anne, is that Anne maybe? Yeah.
And there's another one. Why?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
That struck me too, that it's that you took them out of Egypt, but that, I mean, the question is when Aaron says Elo Elohecha, does he mean your leaders, or does he mean your God? Because he also says tomorrow it's a holiday for Hashem, and are they panicked that Moshe Ha'ish, we're missing our leader, and is that the connection to why it's you who took them out? It's the humanity that they're questioning.
Okay, terrific.
The human leader.
Terrific observation. So one thing that I heard Anne say, she had a question and a suggestion. It seems like, right, a question of what does Aaron mean when he says when he says, Chag Hashem Machar, as opposed to the previous verse where they say Elo Elohecha Yisrael, right? So Lashem, that sounds like, Ladonai, that sounds like a clear reference to God. Elohecha Yisrael, does that mean that also reference to God? These are your gods, or Israel? This is your God, Israel? Or does it mean this is your Elohim in the sense of leader? Right? Sometimes Elohim in the biblical Hebrew can mean not necessarily a god, right? But judges or people of might or leaders or something along those lines. So what were they trying to do here, accomplish in it? What were they requesting from Aaron even earlier in verse 1, right? They say, get up and make us an Elohim. What did they mean? Make us a god? Make us a leader? What were they doing? And this actually is a debate among the already one that you've shown him among the early sort of medieval commentaries. I'm not sure that you can ultimately determine it, but we'll see what we can do in terms of making some suggestions. Yeah, Tzophia,
I guess we'll have to figure out what exactly are they asking from Aaron, and also how is this Ego Masecha the solution to it?
Terrific. Yeah, right, exactly. Maybe it's possible, by the way, that what they're asking for is not what they get. Unclear. Well, I want to go back to Sophia's initial question, which was, she said, as Sophia pointed right, this father, by the way, commentated throughout the generations. They just came from Sinai. They just came from, actually before Sinai, leaving Egypt, right? By Yeru Adonai, by Aminu Adonai, by Moshe Avdo, right? By the splitting of the sea, they believe in God. They develop belief in God, belief in Moshe. And all of a sudden, after Sinai and everything they saw there, they are 5 seconds later asking to make this how do they get there? What's really driving all this? What's their anxiety or fear? What's bothering them? So looking back at the earlier part of the verse here, by Yar Ha'am Kibo Sheish Moshe Leredef Min Ahar. Right, so maybe we can start there. The people see Kibo Sheish Moshe Leredef Min Ahar. What exactly are they seeing? What are they noticing, which leads them to be by Kahel al Aharon? So do you have any thoughts here? Should I jump right in?
Yeah, so depends. So if we're saying that it's boshesh, like tearing or delaying, it could be that they have either some preconceived notion of when Moshe Rabbeinu is supposed to be there, and at a certain point, he's not there, right? And if maybe specifically we see Moshe Rabbeinu going up to Shemayim, which most human beings, I would say, don't go up to Shemayim, and after seeing God's might, it could be that there's something concerning them after a certain point of, oh, is this normal that Moshe Rabbeinu is gone for so long?
Okay,
And
so I think this is already, yeah, these are already two important, like, sub-suggestions, right? One possibility, and we already have this in the Midrash, which Rashi cites, it's from the Tanchuma, these are sources 2 and 4, that they had, it was that they had an assumption that Moshe would arrive back at a certain time. And it appeared to them that he was late. So this you find already in Rashi, again, it's from the Midrash, that the word boshesh is actually sort of a contraction, at least midrashically read, of bashesh, right? That the sixth hour, bashesh showed the 6th hour of the day that he was supposed to arrive back, meaning in the middle of the day, or 12 noon, on the 40th day since his departure, or his sort of ascent to the mountain, had arrived, and they had been told, right, that he would be back. Amar lahem, I will be back at the end of 40 days. Sof arba'im yom, right? I will come back. And they really were off by a day, right? Or maybe in different readings, off by a few hours, but they expected to come back at a certain time, and he didn't come at that time, bashesh, and that is what actually what set them off. Now, excuse me. That is one possibility, but I think something else Tzophia said made me want to reference another possibility, which is that when Moshe actually goes up to the mountain, I think I put this at the bottom of the source sheet. It's earlier in the book of Exodus, right, chapter 24. Right, so God tells Moshe to come up, end of Mishpatim. God tells Moshe to come up to the mountain alone, and he goes up, and this is when the people say, everything God says, said, we will do. Moshe writes down the Torah, which all the words of God. They offer olot and shlamim. Right? Sounds familiar, right? They offer olot or shlamim. They actually have some sort of vision of God, right? By Yeru et Elohei Israel, they see the God of Israel. They see something beneath his feet, right? Beneath God's feet. They are not harmed. They see God and they eat and drink. Okay, they eat and drink. So all this might sound familiar from the story of the eagle, which you just read. This is a precursor, but the point I want to make here is that God then says to Moshe again, Ayom Adonai Moshe, again, we're in chapter 24, come up to the mountain and be, Alei Alei Ahara, come up to the mountain and stay there, Hey Sham, and I'm going to give you Luchot HaEvan Ma'atorah Mitzvah Shekatati Lahoratam. I'll give you this, I'm going to give you Torah. Right, so Moshe goes up by Yaakov, right? He goes up with Yehoshua, and Moshe goes up to the Har Elohim, and he says to the elders, stay here until we return to you. Stay here until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur will be with you. Mi va'al divarim yigash aleihem. Whoever has issue should approach them. So you know that in this context, in this case, when Moshe was on the mountain, he doesn't actually say, I'm going to be back in 40 days. There's a midrashic reading of such, but it could also be that he told them, I'm going to come back. Wait here until I go back. Here's Aaron and Hur, who will care for you in my absence. He goes up to the mountain, enters cloud. There's some sort of fiery instantiation or such of God on top of the mountain, representation of God's kavod on the mountain. Moshe goes up there, and we know that he goes into the cloud for 40 days and 40 nights. Right? So it's not clear that people knew that's how long he's going to be gone. The point is that you circle back, and it's a few points we made, sort of inter aliyah, this chapter from 24 Shemot. But the point is, for our purposes, back to Tzophia's point, is that maybe by Ahar Amki Boshesh Moshe, they just see that he's gone for a long time. Right? And maybe they're used to him, not going on for such a long time. And actually, he went up to a cloud. This is, I think I saw that the Menach tags tied some of this together, right? That he goes up to a cloud, this fiery presence of God up there. He disappears. And as other Rishonim note, he disappears. There's no mana. We don't know how he's surviving up there. Anything to eat or drink, right? They don't know. But the main point is that he disappears and he's gone for a long time, right? And maybe that's actually what sets up their anxiety, less on the specific notion of he's supposed to come back within 40 days.
Especially if, even though maybe they've seen all these great miracles, but they're still a fragile nation, right? Like you see multiple times throughout the Midbar experience that they really aren't necessarily in the mentality of like in a relationship with God, but more of slave mentality. And it could be that for them, like they're so used to structure as being in the slave mentality, and this feels very unstructured, up in the air, and maybe it's just a normal human response.
Interesting. That's interesting. I mean, like a lot of the desert narratives, right? I think just speak lack of structure, wandering, right? Insecurity, independence. So this would actually fit that pattern, right? That they are out of the desert at the foot of Sinai, fine, but there goes their leader, right? As you say, right? They're sort of left lost. Kiboshesh Moshe. By the way, I wanted to just to note, this is sort of going to raise it as like an open question people think about, is that the term boshesh, which means tarry or delay, right? And Rashi here, right, interprets it, in that way, and he notes a few other places in the prophets and in the Nevi'im where that root is used in that context, right? The lashon yichor, right? Boshesh rechbo, when chariot is delayed, etc. But it's actually a rare root for the Chumash, and actually it reminded me of the appearance of the root. It sounds like it's the same root for the story of Eden, because in the story of Eden, the Adam and Eve are naked, but before they eat of the fruit, even though the two of them are naked, lo yitbosheshu, they were not embarrassed, they were not ashamed. Lo yitbosheshu, and one wonders if boshesh and yitbosheshu are sort of are emerged from the same root, and if the word boshesh here carries any resonance of any sort of connotation of shame or embarrassment. But secondly, is there any connection between what's happening in the story of Eden back from that point and the story of the eagle here? I did see that, because once I got that question in my head, I was trying to see if anyone else noticed it, and I did come across a midrash, which I put down further in the document, midrash from Parashat Rabbi, as follows. Parashat Rabbi, vayihu shnehem arumim. The two of them, meaning Adam and Eve, were naked. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, shloshahen shalohim tinu b'shalvatan sheishaot. There were three who did not last, even 6 hours in their shalva and peace. And who are those three? Elohein Adam, Israel, people of Israel, and Sisra. Let's focus on the first two. Adam, Shanamar, below Yitbosheshu, and they were not embarrassed, ashamed of being nude. So they read it as Lo Ba'u Sheishaot V'hu B'Shabbato. He didn't last even 6 hours into that first day, the sixth day of creation, the first day of humanity, in his Shabbat. This is a tradition that this is all happening. The story of the creation of Adam and the expulsion from the garden happened within one day, hour by hour. But he didn't even last halfway through the day. Yisrael, Namar, Vayaram Kivo Shesh Moshe, Kivau Sheshaot below Moshe. And the people also, the 6 hours, they saw that Moshe tarried. The 6 hours came and Moshe had not come. So, and then Sisra Israel. So, at least this midrash connects the two, right? And notes the sort of notes the echo of one verse and another verse. What to make exactly this connection, I'm not sure. At least I'm curious to hear from what people have any thoughts. They both do apparently with sort of prime around the stories of very primary sins. And maybe there's something more to be said there. Let me actually pause. Anybody have any thoughts? So okay, so let's leave it as an open
I have
question.
a thought.
Yeah.
So since we spoke a little bit about that, you had that thought and connection. So when I was reading the Perek, I was sort of trying to keep that in mind. Something that I found was a little bit interesting is, I mean, we didn't read those verses just yet, but when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to Aaron, his brother, saying, why do you do this? This is so terrible.
Yeah.
Aaron's response is sort of defensive and blaming, like, well, you know that they're so bad and it's really on them. And I feel like that during the Gan Eden story, there's a lot of blaming the other, right? So when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Adam, like, Adam, why did you eat from the tree? And it's like, well, Chava's the one that told me. And then when God goes to Chava says, oh, it's the snake. So that was a small thing. I don't know if that is enough for the global connection, but I thought that was an interesting type of dynamic that I noticed.
Yeah, that is interesting. Sort of the motif of sin and then sort of projecting blame, right, or not taking responsibility and projecting blame. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so let's keep that in mind and push forward a little bit. This gets back to, let's talk about to Ant's point earlier, which is, we frame it a little more broadly. It's what are the people, right? We see the people are sort of concerned. We're not, right? Maybe they're concerned because you think Moshe and Aaron forever this specifically designated time. Maybe they're concerned because Moshe sort of has disappeared. More generally, and they just, he's been gone for a long time, up into this fiery presence. So there's concern that he's not going to return. But fundamentally, what are they looking to accomplish? What do they want Aaron to do? So love, make for us an Elohim who will go in front before us. Because this one, Moshe Ha'ish, Asher ha'alunu me'eretz Mitzrayim lo yadanu me'hayah. Took us out of Egypt. We don't know what happened to him. Now the commentators here go in different directions, right? I think probably the most commonly understood, at least in my experience, reading of Kumas Eleno Elohim is that people are asking for a God. They're looking for an Elohim in the sense of a deity who will go before them, carry them further. And that fits with, Elo Elach Yisrael Shalucha B'Eretz Mitzrayim. Maybe Chag L'Hashem Machar, I'm not sure, but it certainly helps explain what was so egregious about their suggestion and what emerges, because they're looking to potentially replace God. I use the word replace because in the retelling of this story in Psalms, in Psalm 106, Kuf Vav, it sort of tells over the story of the desert, or all the stories of the desert, kind of chastising Israel for their lack of belief and loyalty. And when you get to verse 19, is the psalmist says, Ya'asu egel b'chorei v'yishtachavu l'masecha, and made an egel, a calf, and b'chorei by Sinai, what we call Sinai, and they bow down to this molten statue. Vayamiru et kivodam b'tavnit shor ochel esav, and they sort of traded in, right? Their exchanged their kavod. Kavodam, I think, is most easily read as God, right? They traded in God for this cast of this grass eating ox, and forgot their God. So it sounds like from Tehillim what it's saying, that the Tehillim is understanding. And people's request here is Moshe's gone. We have no one. Moshe's tarry. We don't know what's going on. We need a new Elohim. We need a new God who'll go in front of us. And that is one possibility. And it does sound like that's how Rashi reads as well. right? Asher ha'alunu Mitzrayim, the one took us out of Egypt, and he showed us, he was our Mora Derech and our Leva. He showed us where to go, but he's gone now. Now we need now they need gods, right, who will go in front of them. Right now they need a deity to go in front of them and to take over. So one possibility here is that they need a new deity. Yeah.
It's so interesting though, because Moshe Rabbeinu being a human being, and I mean, we saw this in, I think it was source 14, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up, that Aaron and Hor were the ones sort of left when there were problems.
Yeah.
So and specifically Aaron was Moshe Rabbeinu's right-hand man in Egypt. So it's interesting that they don't just ask Aaron to be the next Moshe. And I mean, there's also the huge gap of where's Hor in this story, which I know that a lot of the Midrashim pick up on. But they immediately jumped. Like, it sounds like they think Moshe Rabbeinu had some sort of extra quality, not just he's a regular human being, that Aaron could just take his place.
He's gone. We need a new God entirely. Yeah, I think that's a good question, good point. And like, why don't they just say to Aaron, no, you take over? That is a good question. Your point, by the way, about Hor, yes, the Midrashim have it that the people, according to some Midrashim, again cited by Rashi, that the people initially came to Hor, this figure Hor, and asked him to make him a god. He refused. He chastised them, and they killed him. And that's partly because the story is referencing back to chapter 24. The Midrash says, that Aaron and Hor are with them, and where did Hor ever go? Right. So he somehow disappeared from the narrative. They also wonder if when the Chumash here says, right, Moshe says to them, whoever has issues should go to them. It's kind of a dark, sort of foreshadowing there, right? It's like, I mean, on the face of it, it means whoever has any sort of, I don't know, legal issues or whatever they need, whoever has something going, some matters that need someone to arbitrate it or take, they to somehow go to some authority figure, go to them. But I wonder if there's some, like I say, dark foreshadowing here that whoever has, who is going to have issues is going to go to them, should go to them. I mean, I think Josh is picking that up as well. But what Tzophia here is saying, and this goes back to what Anne said as well, is there's another possibility. There's actually a few possibilities here. So what they're trying to accomplish when they go to Aaron, what they want him to do. But another possibility is they're not looking to replace God as much as replace Moshe. Now, that's borne out, I think, by highlighting certain phrases within the passage we just read. Kuma selena Elohim, make us for us an Elohim, who'll go in front of us, because Zeh Moshe Ha'ish, because Moshe, this man Moshe, Asher ha'alunu me'eretz Mitzrayim, and Moshe is actually called the Ish in a couple, right? Vayifet kova kova yar ke'ein Ish, right? Vayish Moshe anav. So Moshe is the man. Some could be read as sort of nearly mortal, or he is the Ha'ish, right? Moshe Ha'ish Asher ha'alunu me'eretz Mitzrayim. This man, this human who led the charge out of Egypt, maybe he actually took us out of Egypt. We don't know what happened. We don't know what happened to him. And so the notion that what they're looking to do is not replace God, but looking for a replacement for Moshe. And Elohim here means not a deity, but a leader, right? That also is found, among the early commentaries. You find that notion, for example, in the Bechor Shor, Asilenu Elohim Shofet V'Dayan Manhig, right? We're looking for a leader, a judge, a ruler, right? And actually they say Kivon Taticha Elohim the Pharaoh, right? When God says to Moshe, I have made you an Elohim the Pharaoh, who's mean a God to Pharaoh as much as a sort of a Rav to Pharaoh, right? Sort of someone above Pharaoh. That has difficulty with the verse we just referred to Tehillim, by a miud kivodam, that the sin of the capital Tehillim sounds like they traded in their kavod, so he has to read it as kivodam is Moshe, right? well done refers to Moshe and not to God, but that's a little bit difficult, as Ibn Ezra notes on his own right. But nonetheless, it is supported by the initial cause of their concern, Moshe, and also their focus on Moshe, who took us out of Egypt, lo yadanu mehayalon. That's to the point earlier of, it wasn't really God who took them out and not Moshe. Maybe that wasn't so clear to them, right? Or maybe there's a slippage here between the role of Moshe, the prophet, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, God, right? Who we know from the story is sending Moshe, and Moshe is merely his shaliach, merely his agent. But from the people's perspective, I mean, this reflects Tzophia's point about where they're coming from, in terms of their relationship to masters. Perhaps they don't see it that way, right? Perhaps perhaps from their perspective, it is actually Moshe in some sense who took them out of Egypt. And in that case, by the way, just 1 second, just one thought, Sophia. In that case, I just want to point out that what's at stake in the story, right, is, let me put it this way: it's possible that itself is what's so problematic about their behavior. The fact that they are so dependent on Moshe, that they are so reliant upon him, upon this figure in Moshe, as opposed to being reliant solely on God. Perhaps that is what raises the ire of both God and actually Moshe at some level. And the Moshe's perspective, or God's perspective, is that Moshe has a role to play, but he is not the central figure in the story. It's actually interesting that later on, when God is so upset about what the people have done, he says, "You know what? I'm going to destroy them and leave you and build people out of you." Right? The covenantal blessing will go through you, Moshe. And Moshe says, no, you can't do that. And actually, what he says is, if you're going to destroy the people, I'd rather erase me from your book, or take me out of it entirely. Don't, as opposed to, don't destroy that. And Moshe actually revealed that at that moment is that from his perspective, if the people are no more, then his purpose is no more as well. And what we represent here, what we're seeing here, is Moshe, the Anav, understanding that the person Moshe and the role Moshe are two different things, and that Moshe, as Moshe Rabbeinu, that requires people to be Rabbeinu up, and absent that, and absent his leadership, stewardship of them, he would rather see himself erased from the book. And what that's made me think about the past, I guess, day or so, couple of days, is, Moshe doesn't enter the land. Moshe doesn't carry the story to its fruition. And I wonder if, whoever, hitting the rock or otherwise, right, whatever reason it is, that sort of the proximate cause for his lack of admittance into the land. But I've been wondering if actually that he couldn't enter the land, that his inability to enter the land is hardwired into the very DNA of the story, because Moshe the Anav, Moshe the humble one, Moshe the leader who understands that he is in service of the people and in service of this sort of grand mission, rather than vice versa. It's important that we understand that he himself, therefore, doesn't enter the land, right? That there's somebody after him. That's one after Joshua, who actually, by the way, not his son. It's not like a dynasty in the biological sense. It's his Nar, but it's his protege. So the story continues without him. And maybe it had to be that way from the very get-go. So anyway, this is one other reading, another important reading possibly of what actually is happening to Egel. The people want not another God, perhaps according to this reading, they want another Moshe, another leader. Yeah, so Sophia, sorry, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I feel bad to derail your thought, but it's
No,
like
go ahead.
interesting because as a reader of the text or someone that who we want to be on B'nai Yisrael's side, like what we don't really want to be that they wanted a new God. That's a little bit rough. But I think as someone mentioned this earlier, I think it's just like interesting of the name of God that they refer to. Like they always say Elohim, Elohim, and then Aaron's the one that points out Yod K Vav K.
Right.
Which I wonder if that's trying to imply that, yeah, they're really speaking about Elohim as a power. Maybe they're saying Elohim as a God, and Aaron's trying to bring them back. Like, no, like we care about Hashem.
Yeah, that leads to a sort of a question of what is, our intention in all of this, right? Just before we get to that, I want to, raise people's awareness that there is a third possibility, at least one more possibility here, which is, and again, it's more than one, only three, but for our purposes, we've said perhaps they want a replacement deity, perhaps they want a replacement leader. There's a third possibility. This is a possibility articulated by Ibn Ezra and others. So that would be source number 8 if you're following along at home. And he, by the way, has a whole essay here where he deals with other readings of the story, and he sort of knocks down this reading and that reading. It's a difficult story. How could the people do this? How could Aaron do this? What was really motivating them? In any event, that you can take a look at it, on your own. But I wanted to draw your attention to here is when he gets to his explanation. He says, God forbid, they weren't looking for an idol, right, or to, establish an avodah zarah. No, what they really wanted to do was have a replacement, kind of, I guess we could call it as a replacement chariot, footstool, throne, somewhere where God could reside, right, with the people, right. As to say, what they were concerned about is that perhaps untethered, right, without Moshe, and without the security of what he brought in terms of connecting God to their experience, they were said to Aaron, we now need a new Elohim, not a new God, not a new Moshe, but some sort of new again, footstool or throne, container, vessel to sort of anchor God's presence here with us. And this, by the way, people have pointed out, I'm not going to get into it right now because of the time, but pointed out that in Ezekiel's vision, chapter 1, Seher Merkava, is a vision of sort of the heavenly throne room, that they see, I put it down here. They see that the throne of God and underneath God's feet are, here it is, Ezekiel source number 9. We see these chayot, right? These sort of angelic kind of creatures, 4 faces to each one and 4 wings, and kaf raglihem ki kaf regel egel, and their feet kind of look like the feet of a calf. So things like that, may suggest that they were creating not a new God, but sort of the entourage of God's throne, or perhaps of God's presence, or perhaps the throne, again, something which would allow God's presence a place to anchor itself, the context to hold God's presence among them. Now that actually is interesting, because when you think about a structure designed to contain God's presence among the people, well, you think actually, I think, of the Mishkan, right, of the tabernacle, which is designed for just that purpose, right? Designed to create a context for God to, dwell amongst the people. In which case, the Egel actually becomes, and we mentioned this a few weeks ago in the Parashah here, a alternative problematic, sinful, failed Mishkan in a sense, right? And there is, right, and then you notice both the similarities with Mishkan, but also the distinctions. So these are some of the possibilities I think that are raised in terms of what exactly the people are trying to accomplish when they say Kum Aseh Lenu Elohim, and each has their own, each has a local point, right? What were they trying to accomplish? But it raises the broader question of what was so egregious about the sin of the Egel, which caused the first, luchot, the first stage of the covenant to be ruptured, and requiring the second stage of the covenant to be raised. We pause here. Any thoughts, Sophia, or anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, as you were speaking, building up to the Mishkan point, I was thinking Mishkan.
Right.
It's so interesting because the way that the Torah is structured, we have 2 parashot about the Mishkan, we have Chet Egel, and 2 parashot about the Mishkan at the end. And I know it's a debate of like when was the commandment the Mishkan? Like if it happened before, then I feel like this is very surprising. So that's like one point. The other point is about like what makes it so egregious. At the end of the day, for God to want to destroy all of Bnei Israel, I feel like only the Avodah Zarah one, or replacing God Himself, is the most. The punishment meets the deed the most. Right.
Yeah, that's what that one has going for it. Is that we're trained to think of that one as fundamentally as the most fundamental sin, or a most fundamental sin. I guess the truth is that's what intrigues me about the other readings, right? It intrigues me to think that what they're trying to do is replace Moshe, and that was read as that's something to be so egregious. There's, by the way, a middle possibility, which is that what they were trying to do is replace a Moshe, but again, there's slippage, right? And they end up very quickly actually having a replacement deity. Or maybe some people wanted a replacement Moshe, and some people want to replace the deity. So it's not entirely clear. What is worth noting is that, again, we said earlier in chapter 24 that there's some vision of God, and they haShavua Elohim, and vayochlu vayishtu, and they eat and they drink. And here also, they come to this egel. They get up and have a holiday the next day, and they eat and drink. But there's an additional term here, which is vayakumu litzachek. They get up and they begin to litzachek, which has, as Rashi points out, has sort of sexual overtones, where they're engaging in sort of licentiousness, or some sort of like maybe even like cultic sexual activity. Rashi also cites the notion that it's engaging in shfichut damim, right? Their bloodshed, right? The murder of Kor, but possibly it's that piece which really is it's sexually problematic. And I say that because when we talked about this earlier, Tzophia, that when Moshe hears about God tells Moshe about what's happened, Moshe first pleads to God and so convinces God not to destroy the people right away. This is chapter 32. And then Moshe himself comes down on the mountain, right? This is everything. Comes down the mountain in the middle of chapter 32. And he hears this noise, right? Or Joshua hears this noise, and right, they describe the noise. Anyway, they come close to the machaneh, and vayar te egel u'mecholot, and they see the egel and the celebration, the dancing, the cholot. Vayicharach Moshe becomes furious and throws down the luchot and breaks them at the foot of the mountain. So is it possible that what really, partly at least, or what really pushed Moshe over the brink here was this litzachek business, right? And that perhaps that raises a question: what's so bad about that, right? But I think for the Chumash, it's possible that is actually incredibly problematic. That the people have devolved into such a level. Hirsch, after all, Hirsch picks up on that as well and says, what they were trying to do with this whole thing is, create a physical representation of God and a tangible representation of God, something to hold on to, but it quickly slipped, into kind of this hedonistic excess, and that's part of the danger of engaging with the physical in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Litzachek, I'm pretty sure comes up by Yishmael. And
Yeah.
the Midrash also
Okay.
picks up that it's really bad, right? It's not a positive thing. So, and also, I think Yitzchak and Rivka, was it Avimelech who saw them in the tent? They were Litzachek, which also had probably more sexual connotation.
Yeah, those are two of the certainly the latter one is an indication that term carries that, that the root Litzachek, the verb carries that connotation, maybe even a denotation, I'm not sure, but certainly carries that meaning. Okay, so we talked about the rupture here, and I wanted to point out again, others have pointed this out as well, that within the whole story, right, we know that Moshe intercedes on behalf of the people, and they're saved, although there is a cost to pay, and there is kind of a form of retribution. But after the story, and this is partly why it's such an important story for the high holidays and other points in the liturgy and in the tradition, there is forgiveness, right? That God, it's already chapter 34, that God forgives. There's a second Luchot. God teaches Moshe the 13th goat, the attributes which are to be recited, or which we take to be things terms to be recited in order to evoke sicha. And indeed, right, God says salach, right? He says, God, go in our midst, right, and forgive us. And God says, I will create a covenant with you. And this actually seems to be another covenant, right? The next covenant, the post Egel covenant. Well, one thing which is very important to notice that in that post Egel covenant, when we see the possibility of a covenant after the rupture of the covenant, that's probably what's an important story for the Chumash and for the tradition. There's a series of halachot offered, and one of those halachot, actually, this is in chapter 34. Again, this is verse 17. Elohei ma'asecha lo ta'aseh. Do not make any Elohei ma'asecha, any molten god, we could perhaps call it. This is the first time, I think, that that term Elohei ma'asecha lo ta'aseh, it's explicit that Elohei ma'asecha you may not make. Right? So it sounds like a reference back to the Egel ma'asecha. And that's important because I think it's important because it indicates that this second brit and the halachot, the laws that come along with it, the terms of the covenant which come along with it, are in reaction to the story of the Egel. Right? Elohei ma'asecha lo ta'aseh, that's an exact repeat of the term, and it's an exact response to that sin of the Egel. And it makes you wonder if what other features of this story, of the halachot, of the second breed, might also be direct responses. But you can look there, chapter 34. Take into it right now, but it's worth looking into, and perhaps there's a few which jump out that come to mind as possible reactions to the story of the Egel. Okay. So, we are already amazingly, getting close to the end of our time here, but the story it's both highly evocative, but also contains such ambiguity. Such ambiguity. I actually saw today that someone wrote an article, with the essay, the title something like, would you have joined the people at the Egel, if you were there? And I think it's a question that we always ask when we're reading these stories and we try to enter into them. Where would I be in that story? Where am I in the story? But I will say that in terms of our own lives and our own readings of these stories, the notion of replacing God with another God, especially a God made of our, fashioned from our own hands, fashioned from our own wealth and our own resources. And it's not such a stretch, I think, to imagine that. Speak for myself, that I might have been there as well. But I just want to close, for my part at least. Maybe Tzophia has some closing words also. The notion that differently, that we could confuse our leaders for the cause which they are leading us towards and are in service of. That I think is also an important and ever-present danger. I suppose both for ourselves, if we are leaders in whatever sense, and also for other leaders, political leaders, and otherwise. I think that the idea of term limits, if you will, sounds to me seems to have been anticipated according to some readings of the story here, and the figure of Moshe. Moshe is a figure of Moshe, this powerful, initially reticent, but powerful caretaker and leader who maintains his humility. Ultimately, part of his greatness is his ability to separate his own person from his role, right, and his own ego from that which is for which he is service of. Something that we can aspire to, and the danger of that not happening. Well, I think that we see that present. In my own opinion, we see that present. Yesterday, today, and probably tomorrow. And it's a cautionary note not to fall into the mistake of idolatry, of mistaking the thing itself for that which merely represents it. So I think analogously, mistaking our leaders for that which they actually are in service of, rather than seeing them in their own rights as that which we should serve. That is an important cautionary note. Tzophia, how would you wrap us up here?
Wow, so much to say, and I feel like we only started skimming the surface. There's so much.
Yeah.
More. You could probably go on for another 3-4 hours, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, like it's just so interesting seeing everyone's responses to everything, right? Seeing the nation fretting, seeing Aaron's response of trying to manage this angry or scared group of people. It's interesting seeing God's reaction at first being furious and Moshe Rabbeinu trying to calm God down. And then later, after Moshe Rabbeinu sees what happened, he freaks out and is mad as well. And so I think it's like interesting seeing everyone's reactions at the different stages. And I think it was really interesting what you pointed out, the litzachik part of maybe perhaps the way that they ended up getting carried away is all of their values and morals sort of went down the drain. And I sort of liked the perspective of the middle ground of perhaps they really wanted just a leader and it ended up turning out to be something so else. And so quickly you see from going to Har Sinai and such a short amount of time later after Moshe was Boshesh, that this is how they got up to. And it's so easy to let things slide and get to a dangerous place. And I feel like it's so important to be grounded. Like, what are we really aiming for and trying to do, which is have God as the real leader. And the moment that gets blurred, that's the result. Everyone's having a party. They were drinking and eating just like they did by actual Har Sinai, but then they're litzachik and they're adding all these other things that were taking away from their actual goal. So it's definitely important to always be mindful of where we're going.
Right. Yeah. And I think maybe the last thing I'll say is that, as Tzophia said, we just started scratching the surface. I think that one big takeaway is that this particular passage is true of all the Chumash, but one particular passage is very rich and requires really careful thinking and tracking. So encourage folks to take a look at the Parashah and think about it carefully and deeply. Okay, thank you all very much. Nice to know if you were good.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And of course, thank you so much to Tzipora Stepansky and you, John Kelsen. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll be hearing again from Dr. Kelsen, and also along with a great friend of Drisha, Rabbi Sarah Walkenfeld. Both will be with us on the next Parashah. Also, we are going to have the Rappaport family lecture scheduled for Sunday, March 19th at noon Eastern. The topic will pertain to Passover. We hope to see you there as well. And as always, you can find out more information about the classes and register on drisha.org. Thank you so much. Lehitraot.
Thank you, everybody.